They looked at the 74-year-old man and his dog like they were a problem to be solved. 7 minutes later, the hotel owner was on his knees. Have you ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be? Where someone looks at you and decides your worth before you even speak? Well, what unfolded at the Safe Haven Hotel that evening would become a masterclass in how quickly ignorance can turn into desperation. The late afternoon sun stretched across the interstate as Arthur Cap Rostova eased his weathered frame from the driver's seat of his pickup truck. At 74, Cap still moved with the deliberate precision of his 4 decades as a U.S. Navy SEAL. Measured, purposeful, never wasted motion. The years had etched lines into his face like a roadmap of service, sacrifice, and hard-won wisdom. Beside him, alert and ready, sat Bolt, a Belgian Malinois, whose intelligent brown eyes missed absolutely nothing. This wasn't just any dog. Bolt was Cap's lifeline, his carefully trained partner in navigating a world that had become increasingly challenging since his military service ended. Years of exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam had left Cap with peripheral neuropathy, nerve damage that sometimes made his hands shake and challenged his balance without warning. The anxiety that followed him home from too many classified missions would creep up like fog, thick and suffocating. But Bolt, this remarkable animal, had been trained to recognize the early signs. A gentle lean against Cap's leg when his balance wavered, deep pressure therapy when the memories threatened to overwhelm him, even retrieving medication or seeking help if Cap experienced a severe episode. The choice of a Belgian Malinois wasn't accidental. These dogs had worked alongside SEAL teams for years, intelligent, loyal, unshakable under pressure. Bolt represented the same qualities that had made Cap's military career legendary: focus, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. For Cap, Bolt wasn't a pet or even just a service animal. He was essential medical equipment wrapped in fur and 4 legs, his final teammate in the complex battlefield of civilian life. The Safe Haven Hotel looked exactly like its name suggested, a simple, clean refuge off Highway 64 after 8 hours of driving from Cap's home in Virginia Beach to visit his daughter in North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just a place to rest before the final stretch of his journey. The kind of establishment that should welcome any traveler looking for a clean bed and basic courtesy. Cap had called ahead to confirm they had availability. He'd even mentioned Bolt during the reservation, though legally he wasn't required to. The voice on the phone had been pleasant enough, assuring him they had rooms available. What the voice hadn't mentioned was the storm of ignorance waiting for him in that lobby. As Cap and Bolt approached the glass doors of the Safe Haven Hotel, neither of them could have predicted that the next hour would transform a simple check-in into a battle over federal law, human dignity, and the price of discrimination. Cap had fought enemies on foreign soil to protect the freedoms Americans enjoy at home. He never expected he'd have to fight for his own basic rights in a hotel lobby with his service dog by his side. If you believe veterans deserve respect and that service members who've sacrificed for our country shouldn't have to educate civilians about basic human decency, hit that like button right now. But what happened next would turn this simple hotel check-in into a lesson about respect, law, and the price of ignorance. A lesson that would cost one business owner everything he thought he knew about running a hotel, and leave him begging for forgiveness from a man who had already given more than his share for his country. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whisper, and Cap Rostova, decorated Navy SEAL and American hero, walked into what would become the most expensive 7 minutes in Safe Haven Hotel's history. The lobby of the Safe Haven Hotel buzzed with the quiet activity of evening travelers, business people checking phones, families gathering luggage, the soft ding of elevator arrivals. Cap approached the front desk where a young woman with a bright smile and a name tag reading Tiffany looked up from her computer screen. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" Her practiced hospitality faltered the moment her eyes landed on Bolt, who sat perfectly still beside Cap, alert but calm. "I have a reservation under Rostova," Cap said in his measured tone, the kind of voice that had once commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places. Tiffany's smile became strained. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have a strict no-pets policy here. You'll need to make other arrangements for your dog. The words hung in the air like a challenge Cap had heard too many times before. He met her gaze directly, his expression unchanged. This is Bolt. He's a service animal, not a pet. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, he's permitted to accompany me. Cap's response carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades in environments where knowing the rules could mean the difference between life and death. This wasn't his first encounter with ignorance, and his tone suggested it wouldn't be his last. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of her depth. Well, do you have his certification papers or an ID? I'll need to see his documentation. The question was exactly what Cap expected, and exactly what the law prohibited. The ADA doesn't require documentation for service animals, he explained patiently. No certification, no registration, no special identification. Bolt, sensing the tension in Cap's voice, performed one of his trained responses. He shifted slightly, leaning just enough against Cap's left leg to provide grounding support. The movement was subtle, professional, the work of an animal trained to read human stress signals with the precision of medical equipment. But he should be wearing a vest, Tiffany insisted, grasping for something that sounded official. All service dogs wear vests, don't they? Cap's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Vests aren't required by law either. You're permitted to ask exactly 2 questions. Is this a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has he been trained to perform? He answered both without hesitation. Yes, Bolt is a service animal required for my service-connected disabilities. He's trained to provide mobility assistance, deep pressure therapy, and medical alert responses. A middle-aged businessman near the elevator glanced over, his attention caught by the increasingly tense exchange. A family with teenagers had stopped their conversation, the parents exchanging concerned looks. The lobby's casual evening atmosphere had shifted into something more charged. Tiffany's face flushed red. Instead of acknowledging her mistakes, she doubled down. Sir, I understand what you're saying, but hotel policy is very clear. We simply cannot accommodate pets without proper documentation and fees. The word pets struck Cap like a slap. This wasn't ignorance anymore. This was willful disregard for federal law. His military bearing became more pronounced. Shoulders squared, spine straight, the kind of presence that had once made enemy combatants think twice about their choices. Ma'am, Cap said, his voice dropping to the tone that had once commanded a room full of Navy SEALs. Charging fees or denying access to a service animal is a direct violation of federal law. I suggest you contact someone who understands the Americans with Disabilities Act. Bolt remained motionless beside him, a perfect example of a trained service animal, calm, focused, ready to respond to his handler's needs. The contrast between the dog's professional composure and Tiffany's flustered panic couldn't have been more stark. The businessman had taken out his phone, not talking but watching. The family near the elevator had moved closer, their teenage daughter whispering urgently to her parents. Word was spreading through the small lobby that something significant was happening. Tiffany's hand hovered over the phone. I'm going to call my manager. You'll need to wait here. Cap nodded once, a gesture that carried 4 decades of unwavering resolve. I'll wait. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood a decorated Navy SEAL who knew his rights. On the other, a hotel staff trained in policies that violated federal law. The next few minutes would determine which force was stronger, ignorance backed by misguided authority, or knowledge armed with quiet dignity. 5 minutes passed before footsteps echoed across the lobby's marble floor. Mark Henderson, junior manager, approached with the confident stride of someone who believed his title would resolve any problem. His crisp white shirt and hotel badge gleamed under the lobby lights as he assessed the situation with a quick glance between Cap, Bolt, and his increasingly nervous employee. Good evening, sir. I'm Mark, the manager on duty. Tiffany tells me there's been some confusion about our pet policy. Cap's expression remained steady, but those who knew military bearing could see the subtle shift, the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested patience wearing thin. There's no confusion, son. This is a service animal, and denying us accommodation violates federal law. Mark's smile carried the practiced condescension of middle management. I understand your position, sir, but our hotel policy is very clear. We don't allow animals without proper documentation and the standard pet fee of $75 per night. He's not a pet, Cap replied, his voice carrying the edge of steel that had once commanded respect in war zones. The Americans with Disabilities Act supersedes your hotel policy. The businessman near the elevator had his phone out now, recording discreetly but deliberately. The teenage girl from the family whispered to her mother, "Mom, isn't this illegal? We learned about this in civics class." Mark glanced around the lobby, noting the growing attention, but pressed forward with misguided confidence. "Well, if you can't provide documentation, perhaps you could leave the animal in your vehicle overnight. We have security cameras in the parking lot." The suggestion hung in the air like a physical blow. Cap's military composure cracked just enough to reveal the fire beneath. "You're suggesting I leave my medically necessary service animal in a car overnight? That's not just illegal, it's cruel." "Sir, I'm trying to find a compromise." "There is no compromise with federal law." Cap's voice dropped to the tone that had once made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. A first offense violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act carries a fine of up to $75,000. That's 1,000 times your pet fee. Mark's confident smile faltered. 75,000? That seems excessive. "I'm also within my rights to file a complaint with the Department of Justice," Cap continued, his tone never rising but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "They handle ADA violations very seriously, very expensively." The lobby had gone quiet except for the soft mechanical hum of the air conditioning. Even the family's teenagers had stopped talking, sensing they were witnessing something significant. The businessman continued recording, no longer trying to hide his phone. Mark's face had gone pale. The numbers Cap mentioned, $75,000, Department of Justice, federal law violations, these weren't abstract concepts anymore. They were very real threats to his employer's business. I need to call the owner," Mark stammered, reaching for his phone with hands that weren't quite steady. Cap nodded once. "That would be wise. Comment below if you've ever had to educate someone about your rights, because what happened in the next 7 minutes would prove that knowledge is the most powerful weapon against ignorance." Mark stepped away from the desk, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent whispers. The countdown had begun. 7 minutes for ignorance to collide with the crushing reality of federal law. 7 minutes for a hotel owner to discover that his staff's training had just put his entire business at risk. The clock was ticking. Cap walked deliberately to the lobby seating area and lowered himself into a leather chair near the window. Bolt immediately positioned himself at Cap's feet, lying down with the practiced precision of a military sentry, alert, ready, but utterly calm. This wasn't defiance. This was dignified protest. Cap folded his hands in his lap and waited with the same patience he'd once used in hostile territory, watching targets for hours without moving. Mark paced near the reception desk, phone pressed tightly to his ear, his voice a harsh whisper that carried just enough for Cap to catch fragments. "Sir, I know it's after hours, but we have a situation." "No, sir, he won't leave. He's talking about federal fines." The teenage girl from the family approached her parents. "Dad, that man's a Navy SEAL. Look at his bearing, his posture. We should help him." Her father, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, nodded grimly. "Some fights aren't ours to join, sweetheart, but some are worth witnessing." Mark's conversation grew more urgent. "Mr. Thorne, he mentioned $75,000. "Yes, sir, that's what I said." "DOJ complaints." Cap's voice cut across the lobby with surgical precision. "You might also mention that the Department of Justice maintains a public database of ADA violations. Business names, settlement amounts, enforcement actions, all searchable online." Mark's face drained of color. He repeated Cap's words into the phone, each syllable landing like a hammer blow on the other end of the line. 23 miles away, Reginald Thorne nearly dropped his phone in his home office. The numbers Mark was relaying hit him like physical blows. $75,000, Department of Justice, public database. Each phrase carried the weight of business catastrophe. Thorne's mind raced through the calculations with the ruthless efficiency of a man who'd built his hotel chain from nothing. $75,000 in fines was devastating enough, But that was just the beginning. ADA lawsuits could triple that amount. Legal fees would add another $50,000 minimum. But the real killer, the thing that could destroy him completely, was the reputation damage. A 74-year-old Navy SEAL, denied service with his medical service dog. Those words would spread across social media like wildfire. The story practically wrote itself. Hotel discriminates against elderly war hero. Veterans organizations would organize boycotts. Local news would pick it up. National news might follow. His hotel would become a symbol of everything wrong with how America treats its heroes. Thorne grabbed his car keys with shaking hands. Navy SEALs occupied a special place in American consciousness. The ultimate warriors, the men who'd killed bin Laden, the heroes who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. To be seen discriminating against one of them wasn't just bad business, it was corporate suicide. "I'm coming down there right now," he barked into the phone. "Don't let him leave. Don't say another word about policies. Just keep him there." Back in the lobby, Mark ended the call with trembling fingers. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He approached Tiffany, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror. "The owner's coming," Mark whispered. He sounded upset. Tiffany glanced toward Cap, who sat motionless in his chair, a picture of calm dignity. Bolt hadn't moved from his position, demonstrating the kind of discipline that spoke to years of professional training. "What do we do until he gets here?" "Nothing," Mark replied, his voice hollow. "We wait, and we pray we still have jobs tomorrow." The businessman with the phone had moved closer, no longer trying to hide his recording. Word had spread somehow. Hotel staff from other departments appeared in doorways, stealing glances at the man who had turned their routine evening into chaos without raising his voice or making a single demand. A maintenance worker whispered to a housekeeper, "That's a Navy SEAL. My brother served. You don't mess with those guys. They've earned their respect the hard way." The lobby's atmosphere had transformed completely. What began as a simple check-in had become a masterclass in the power of knowledge, law, and quiet dignity. Cap remained still, hands folded, watching Mark pace nervously between the desk and the phone. 7 minutes. That's how long it had taken for a hotel's ignorance to collide with federal law, for staff confidence to crumble into panic, for an owner to realize his business hung in the balance. The real reckoning was still coming. Reginald Thorne's hands gripped the steering wheel as he raced through the night toward his hotel, his mind calculating damage with the cold precision of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. 23 years of building his hospitality business, and it could all vanish because 2 employees didn't understand basic federal law. $75,000 in fines, that was just the opening bid. ADA lawsuits typically settled for 3 to 5 times that amount. Legal fees would add another mountain of costs. But those numbers paled compared to the real threat: social media destruction. The headlines wrote themselves in his head. Hotel refuses service to 74-year-old Navy SEAL and his service dog. War hero humiliated at Safe Haven Hotel. Elderly SEAL forced to fight for basic rights at local business. Thorne had watched other hotels get destroyed by similar stories. Last year, a chain in Oregon faced nationwide boycotts after denying service to a blind veteran with a guide dog. The footage went viral within hours. Veterans organizations organized protest campaigns. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. The franchise lost 3 locations and filed for bankruptcy protection within 6 months. Navy SEALs occupied sacred ground in American culture. These were the warriors who'd eliminated Osama bin Laden, who ran into burning buildings while others ran out, who represented everything heroic about American military service. To discriminate against one, especially a 74-year-old who'd given his entire adult life to his country, wasn't just bad business. It was cultural suicide. Thorne's phone buzzed with notifications. His stomach dropped as he realized what was happening. Social media posts were already appearing. The businessman in his lobby had posted a video clip. Elderly Navy SEAL denied hotel service with medical service dog. This is happening right now at Safe Haven Hotel. 12 shares in the first minute. Comments flooding in with outrage and disbelief. The gap between what should have happened and what did happen yawned like a chasm in his mind. His staff training should have covered ADA compliance. Basic disability rights should have been standard knowledge. Instead, his employees had violated federal law while being recorded, creating a perfect storm of legal and reputational catastrophe. Another memory surfaced, a competitor in Richmond whose staff made a similar mistake with a wheelchair-bound veteran. The video reached 2.3 million views. The business never recovered. The owner sold at a loss and left the hospitality industry entirely. His phone rang. His marketing director's panicked voice filled the car. "Reg, we've got a problem. The Safe Haven incident is trending locally. Veterans groups are starting to share the video. We need damage control immediately." "I'm handling it," Thorne replied, pressing harder on the accelerator. "I'm almost there." But was he too late? In the age of instant communication, 7 minutes might as well be 7 hours. The damage could already be spreading across the internet like a wildfire, burning down everything he'd spent decades building. His business model depended on reputation, customer reviews, word-of-mouth recommendations, community standing. Hotels lived or died by their ability to make guests feel welcome, safe, respected. His staff had done the exact opposite to someone who deserved the highest level of respect. The irony crushed him. This man had probably faced enemy fire, survived conditions that would break most people, served his country with distinction for decades. And now, in what should have been his golden years, he was being denied basic accommodation at a third-rate hotel by employees who didn't understand their own legal obligations. Share this if you think businesses need better disability training, because what happened next would prove that ignorance isn't just morally wrong, it's financially devastating. Thorne's headlights cut through the darkness as he pulled into his hotel's parking lot, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether he still had a business to save. The lobby doors burst open with such force they rattled in their frames. Reginald Thorne stumbled through, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from his frantic drive. His tie hung loose, his hair mussed, and perspiration beaded across his forehead despite the cool evening air. His eyes swept the lobby like a man surveying a disaster zone until they locked onto Cap, still sitting calmly in the leather chair with Bolt at his feet. Mark stepped forward, confusion written across his face. "Mr. Thorne, I didn't expect you to." "Where is he?" Thorne cut him off, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. His gaze had already found its target. Thorne crossed the lobby in quick, unsteady strides, bypassing his bewildered staff entirely. He stopped directly in front of Cap, who looked up with the same calm expression he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. For a moment, the two men simply regarded each other, one radiating desperate energy, the other embodying unshakable composure. "Mr. Rostova," Thorne began, his words tumbling out in a rush of anxiety and remorse. "I am Reginald Thorne, the owner of this hotel. I am profoundly, deeply sorry for what has happened here tonight. This is absolutely inexcusable." Cap remained seated, his hands still folded, letting Thorne's panic fill the space between them. Bolt hadn't moved from his position, a perfect example of service animal discipline amid the chaos. "Please," Thorne continued, his voice cracking slightly, "you must accept my sincerest apologies. What my staff did tonight, it's a complete violation of everything this hotel should represent, a complete failure on my part as an owner." The lobby had gone dead silent. Mark and Tiffany stood frozen near the reception desk, watching their composed, authoritative boss transform into a man pleading for forgiveness. Other guests had emerged from elevators and corridors, drawn by the commotion, creating an audience for Thorne's public humiliation. "Your stay here is completely complimentary," Thorne rushed on, his words coming faster as desperation mounted. "Entirely on the house, every night, every meal, every service. Please, allow us to upgrade you to our presidential suite, our finest accommodation." Cap's expression remained unchanged, neither hostile nor welcoming. He simply listened, letting Thorne dig his own grave with increasingly frantic offers. "Dinner tonight, anything you want from our restaurant, completely our pleasure. Room service, spa services, anything we can provide." Thorne's hands gestured wildly as he spoke. "I'll personally donate $5,000 to disabled American veterans in your name. 10,000, whatever it takes to make this right." The businessman who'd been recording held his phone steady, capturing every moment of the owner's meltdown. His earlier video had already reached hundreds of shares, but this footage, a hotel owner literally begging for forgiveness, would be worth its weight in gold for social media engagement. Tiffany whispered to Mark, "What's happening? Why is he acting like this?" Mark's face had gone ashen. "We messed up. We messed up bad." The family near the elevator watched in fascination as the power dynamic completed its total reversal. The teenage daughter murmured to her parents, "From no pets allowed to presidential suite in 7 minutes. That's gotta be some kind of record." Cap finally spoke, his voice carrying the same measured authority it had maintained all evening. "Mr. Thorne." The hotel owner stopped mid-sentence, hanging on Cap's every word like a man awaiting judgment. "I appreciate your apologies," Cap said, rising slowly from his chair. Bolt immediately came to attention beside him. "I accept your offer of accommodation." Relief flooded Thorne's features, but Cap wasn't finished. "However," Cap continued, his tone sharpening just enough to cut through Thorne's gratitude, "your staff requires immediate training on the Americans with Disabilities Act. This should not happen to anyone else. Federal law isn't a suggestion." Thorne nodded frantically. "Absolutely, immediately, tomorrow morning. I'll bring in specialists, lawyers, whoever it takes." The reversal was complete. The man they tried to remove with his pet now commanded the owner's desperate attention, the presidential suite, and a promise of systematic change. Cap studied Thorne's face for a long moment, reading the genuine remorse beneath the panic. This wasn't just fear of financial consequences. This was a man confronting his own failure to protect the people who deserved protection most. "Your apology is accepted, Mr. Thorne," Cap said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "But understand this. I didn't come here to punish your business. I came here to exercise my legal rights as an American citizen." He gestured toward Mark and Tiffany, who stood transfixed near the reception desk. "Your staff needs immediate education. The Americans with Disabilities Act isn't optional. Service animals have the same access rights as wheelchairs or hearing aids. They're medical equipment, not pets." Thorne nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. First thing tomorrow morning." "Not tomorrow," Cap corrected, his tone firm but not harsh. "Tonight, before I leave this lobby, I want assurance that every employee on duty understands 2 simple facts. Service animals require no documentation, no fees, no special identification. And the only questions you may legally ask are whether the animal is required for a disability and what specific task it performs." Bolt shifted slightly at Cap's side, a reminder that even during this resolution, he remained alert to his handler's needs. The dog's perfect behavior throughout the entire confrontation had been its own education for everyone watching. "You see this animal?" Cap continued, looking around the lobby at the gathered audience. "He's been trained to detect medical episodes, provide balance support, retrieve medication, and seek help in emergencies. That training represents thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars. He's not a pet any more than a pacemaker or insulin pump is a convenience." Mark stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, we honestly didn't know. We were just following what we thought was policy." Cap's expression softened slightly, recognizing genuine ignorance rather than willful discrimination. "Son, not knowing the law doesn't excuse violating it, but learning from mistakes, that's how we grow." He turned back to Thorne. "This should not happen to anyone else. Not to a veteran, not to a civilian, not to anyone who depends on a service animal to navigate daily life. It is the law, and it exists for good reason." Thorne extended his hand toward the elevator bank. "Please, let me personally escort you to the presidential suite, and I give you my word, every employee will receive comprehensive ADA training before their next shift." As they walked across the lobby, Bolt maintaining perfect heel position beside Cap, the gathered onlookers began to disperse. But the lesson had been witnessed, recorded, and would spread far beyond these walls. Tiffany approached Mark, her voice barely a whisper. "How much trouble are we in?" "Legally, we dodged a bullet," Mark replied, watching Cap's dignified departure. "But personally, we just learned something we should have known years ago." The businessman who'd been recording pocketed his phone with a satisfied nod. This story wouldn't destroy a business now, it would educate one. The video would still circulate, but with a different message: how quickly understanding and respect could transform conflict into resolution. Cap had accomplished his mission without firing a shot, without raising his voice, without demanding anything beyond what the law already guaranteed. Justice served through knowledge, dignity maintained through strength, and education delivered through experience. An hour later, Cap sat in the presidential suite's leather recliner, Bolt resting peacefully at his feet on the plush carpet. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fought for American freedoms on foreign battlefields for 4 decades, only to wage another battle for basic rights in a hotel lobby with his service dog as his only backup. Room service had delivered a steak dinner he hadn't ordered, compliments of a panicked owner trying to repair irreparable damage to his conscience. Cap ate slowly, methodically, while Bolt maintained his vigilant watch. Even in luxury, the dog's training never ceased. 2 floors below, Reginald Thorne stood before his hastily assembled night staff in the conference room. His hands shook slightly as he held printouts of ADA compliance guidelines, his voice hoarse from the evening's stress. Effective immediately, every employee will complete ADA training before their next shift, he announced to the dozen faces staring back at him. No exceptions, no excuses. What happened tonight cannot happen again. Mark raised his hand tentatively. Sir, what exactly did we do wrong? Thorne's response came with the weight of expensive education. We violated federal law. We discriminated against a disabled veteran. We treated a service animal like a pet, charged illegal fees, demanded documentation that doesn't exist, and suggested leaving medical equipment in a parking lot overnight. The room fell silent as the magnitude of their ignorance settled over them. More importantly, Thorne continued, we failed a man who spent his life protecting our right to run this business freely. Arthur Rostova served this country for 40 years. Tonight, we served him lawsuits and humiliation. Tiffany's voice was barely a whisper. How do we fix this? We learn. We change. We make sure every guest with a disability feels welcomed, not tolerated. Thorne placed the ADA guidelines on the table. These aren't suggestions. They're federal law. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. The ripple effects had already begun. The businessman's video, now approaching 10,000 shares, carried a different message than originally intended. Comments praised Cap's restraint and dignity. Veterans organizations shared it not as outrage fuel, but as education. The story evolved from discrimination exposed to masterclass in civil rights advocacy. Cap's approach had transformed potential destruction into teachable moments. He could have demanded maximum penalties, public humiliation, legal warfare. Instead, he chose education over revenge, understanding over punishment, change over conquest. The presidential suite's windows overlooked the interstate where travelers continued their journeys, unaware that a quiet revolution had occurred in the lobby below. One man's knowledge of his rights had educated an entire staff, reformed company policies, and created a template for dignity under pressure. Cap understood something many people miss. Real change happens not through outrage or demands, but through calm assertion of established rights. He didn't need to raise his voice because the law spoke loudly enough. He didn't need to threaten because consequences were already written in federal statutes. Bolt stirred at his feet, performing a routine position check, a trained response to ensure his handler remained stable and alert. Even in rest, the partnership continued, a reminder that independence often requires interdependence. The broader lesson extended far beyond hotel lobbies and service animals. In a world where rights are often challenged, knowledge becomes the ultimate weapon. Cap had armed himself not with anger but with education, not with demands but with dignity. His victory wasn't personal, it was systematic. Tomorrow, other guests with service animals would benefit from tonight's confrontation. Future travelers with disabilities would encounter educated staff instead of ignorant policies. One person's willingness to stand firm had created lasting institutional change. The true measure of justice isn't punishment of wrongdoers, but prevention of future wrongs. Cap had achieved both without compromising his character or abandoning his principles. Subscribe to Story by Liam for more stories where justice prevails and respect is earned. Because in a world that often forgets the value of quiet dignity, we need reminders that knowledge, courage, and unwavering principle can still change hearts, minds, and policies. Sometimes the greatest battles are won not with weapons, but with wisdom. Sometimes the most powerful victories happen not on battlefields, but in hotel lobbies where one person refuses to accept less than the respect they've rightfully earned.